Hello and welcome to Noah's Ark Carpentry. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a router table for less than $5. For me, I'm making it for free besides the cost of the router. I can just take it off and put it back on when I want. But I'm just using scrap here. I have it pre-assembled, but I'm going to be showing you how to build it. Now you can attach it to your workbench. For me, I'm just having the legs to the height of the workbench, and I'm going to be using a hinge, so I can just take the legs off and fold it up underneath. Let's get started.
Alright, so to begin, I started by pre-drilling my holes for the hinges. You want to begin by placing the hinge down, outlining it with your pencil. Make sure the outline's level to where you want it on your exact location. For me, I just pretty much centered it in my workpiece. Then I began by making a pin. Now for the top two, for my stud, I used 3-inch screws, and I made a pin with the 3-inch screw. After that, I made sure it was level, and I used the other 3-inch screw to go right through the stud. Now for the paneling, I used an 1.5-inch screw, just wood screws. And then after that, I continued to make my markings, which I already had made on that board. You can make that board whatever size you'd like, whatever really works for you, honestly. But for me, this one works perfectly and fits on my workbench perfect. So once you have those holes pre-drilled, you want to be using a 1/16 drill bit. For me, I'm using a titanium bit that just has a quick bit adjustment. So once you pre-drill those holes, line it up. It's easier to start it with the screwdriver. This part's kind of funny right here. Watch me drop the board. Now, pre-drill your holes, set it in. See, I just put it in there with my hand because I already had it pre-drilled. Then just drill it in. Make sure it's nice and tight. Begin by doing one, and then make sure it lines up, and then continue with the rest. After doing so, the next step will be to attach the legs. Now, the material you'll see me using that is attached to the hinge for the platform, it is just a basic shelving material. You can pick this up at Lowe's, you can pick this up at Home Depot, Harbor Freight. You'll see it in the lumber section. It should be by the framing aisle. Now, I like this material, especially for my workbenches, because I picked this material up for free at a construction site, as I explained earlier. But for me, I like a workbench that I can mess up. I don't want a nice workbench that costs a bunch of money. I want something that I can just pop it off and replace if it gets messed up. That's why I choose to use this material, just because of how cheap and how efficient it is, because it always gives you a nice, plain, even surface. Now, when you're screwing in the hinges, you got to make sure that it is nice and plain. So if you have any screw heads coming out, just take your engineer file and just file those heads down. So for these legs, you want to make sure they're pre-drilled. And for the top parts, I did a countersink that's probably about 3/16 down, and I used the 3-inch screws to secure the legs. The legs are made out of a 3/4 inch pine, well, a 1-inch, 3/4 inch actual. So to make those pieces, all you have to do is cut a 2-inch strip and a 3-inch strip, make a miter, do a little bit of glue, pre-drill 1/16 inch, and take your 2.5-inch, maybe 2-inch screws and just screw it together. Now those came from an old table that I unassembled from a previous workbench that I made to look nice. Now I just had these laying around, so I cut them to size. It's plain, even, and quite frankly just looks nice. So I secured it with the 3-inch screws at the top, as you can see. Now a really good thing to do that I always do is I just set the screws in for about 3/16 into the board, and then I'll just make it just so the tip pops out just a little bit so I can pre-align it with my board before I put it in all the way. Then I sink it in. Then I sink the rest of the screws in. Okay, so now it is time to put up the middle support. This will prevent your table from wobbling. Now, you're going to want to countersink it, at least I did. You don't have to, depending on what material you're using. For me, I used 1.5" screws, so I just countersinked in about halfway into the board, and then I just preset the screws inside the board. Now for me, I'm putting it at 18 inches exactly, and I'm making sure that is nice and level. This will prevent your table from wobbling when you are doing your cuts. Now that is very important. You don't want your table to wobble, especially with something spinning so fast and having a free hand around it. You don't want it to slip up and it get your hand instead of the board, which is very, that would just suck. You don't want that. That's an emergency room visit right there. So I just preset the screws and I go underneath and I pin one. So once I pin one underneath on there, I set my level on top just to make sure it's nice and level. Now I'm putting it at approximately 18 inches. I just measured up. I'm not perfect, but I'm pretty good at estimating where 18 inches is at, or pretty much where anything on the tape measure would be. So I pin one, I put my level on, and I watch that bubble and I make sure it's perfectly even. Now this will just give you extra support, and it is well worth doing. Now when you're done, the reason I use the hinge to support it and not just a plate is because I want to be able to just take those 3-inch screws out, set that aside, and then fold it up. So whenever I need extra room in my tool room, or if I wanted to put my table saw on my table and then cutting a big board, I could wheel my cart over, which I also have a box for, that it is on wheels, so it is also playing with my table. So I'll also be showing you how to make that as well, along with my compressor cart that I'm going to be building. I'm going to be showing you how to do